government, right down to private sector, to your office, as you watch, there is an imbalance when it comes to the positions of women versus men in decision-making positions. And that's a very curious case, considering the number of women we have as a nation versus the number of men. The number of girls in school, the number of girls who graduate from school versus the number of men who do. But we'll get into that in a moment. My guest today on the show is Mrs. Sheila Minkah. She is the convener of the Affirmative Action Bill Coalition, and she is also a lawyer with over 20 years of experience. We've been hearing about her for 34 years, actually. 34 years of experience. She is a gender rights activist. She's been speaking for women. She is the managing consultant at ALC Consult, formerly Apex Law. She's the president of the Women's Forum of the Ghana Bar Association. She is a skilled and sought-after international development consultant and private legal practitioner. And she's here to talk to us about this bill and how it's faring in the House. Madam, you're welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have you. I'm very happy to meet you in person.
Thank you very much. I'm also happy to be here.
Awesome. So let's get straight to this bill. How long has it been in the works for?
A lot of work had gone on, prior to 2011, doing research, some policy work, etc. But it was in 2011 that the then Ministry of Women and Children Affairs set up a multi-sectorial group to start the process of drafting this bill. So, in 2011, this group made up of people from civil society, academia, the political parties, and some civil servants as well. We met. Did some work, look at literature review, what has gone out there, what research has been done, what proposals are out there, what are Ghana's obligations, etc. And then we split into different groups, went to all the 10 regions to do what we call town hall meetings. That these are the findings, these are the suggestions come up with a law to address gender imbalance, what do people think, etc. Then the ideas were all pulled together, and then it was a 21-member group. A few were selected, including myself, Mrs. Hilary Bidema, and then Mrs. John Opari, to put the proposals together. And a legislative drafter helped in drafting it.
Who began the process? Whose idea was this?
I guess, there was a lot of agitation for something to be done about the gender imbalance that we were experiencing in Ghana, particularly within the governance institutions. So the minister was then in charge of the Ministry of Women and Children I think it was Honorable Juliana Mensah. So it was during her time that the process started. But because it's a very important issue for Ghana, it has continued along other ministers as well. So
from when it began till now, it's been about 13 years.
Yes.
What's the holdup?
When you're trying to change something which is embedded in culture, embedded in religion, embedded in society, it is not that easy. I recall that the very first draft came out in 2013, and lots of consultations still took place to get people's views, etc. It was in 2016 that the bill first went to Parliament, and it was laid in Parliament around October 2016. Election took place in December 2016, so it didn't go far. I think it was gazetted. It was even because around that time, the parliamentarians would not be available. It didn't even go through the normal readings, the first reading, etc., and then it lapsed. And the process started again in 2017 under Honorable Otiko. One of the laws she picked up as the new minister after the election was this particular bill. She also picked it up. Lots of consultations were done, etc., etc., and then it went to cabinet. And they, came up with some additional things that should be done to it, hold more consultations, do this, etc. So it was in cabinet for quite a while, a lot of up and down in cabinet with a lot of changes required, etc., etc. Then there was a lull around between 2021. We had a problem with the Ministry for Gender. The then minister wasn't available, so that not much
could be done at the time.
2020 bill, yes, 2020 bill, not much
Okay.
happened, etc. Until a new minister was appointed, I think in 2022, Minister for Gender was appointed. This is also one of the key bills that
She picked up.
She picked up.
But it appears, I mean, from what you've told me, all the gender ministers, since the draft was ready, have picked this up to champion. But it has still not been able to go through.
Well,
Where are we now, currently?
So currently, after a lot of up and down, because one of the things I heard, one of the gaps too was that normally some bills have to be backed by a policy.
Okay.
So there was this national gender policy of 2015. It was for 5 years. It lapsed in 2020. So around the time that the minister in 2022 wanted to take the 2022, early 2023, wanted to push it a cabinet for approval to go to parliament, it was indicated that there was a need to have a gender policy in place to support it. So some initiatives also went on to get one done. So it was in October 2020, sometime I think in September, it received cabinet approval to go to parliament. It was in, when parliament resumed in October, I think it's October 31st or so, then it was one of the key bills that went for the first reading in parliament. We were very excited because around that time, we were told that it was going to go through the process under what they call a certificate of urgency for certain reasons. Normally, when a bill goes through a certificate of urgency, very little input comes from outside. It's the parliamentarians who push it quickly themselves. Yeah, within 3 months, it should have passed. But I understand that it was after the first reading, the bill was referred to the Gender and Children Committee. When they looked at the bill, they decided that this is not a bill that could go through the certificate of urgency because they needed input from outside. They needed stakeholders from outside to also come to bring in. But the
stakeholders had met and drafted the bill.
Stakeholders had met and drafted the bill. A lot of consultation had taken place. Yes. But they still thought that the processing still needed more input from stakeholders.
Why?
So, because they thought that they needed some people who have done some work, some experts from outside, etc., to come and speak to it. It's not an easy bill to deal with. You know, all the sentiments around it, etc. So, after their first meeting, they indicated that they wanted to open it up. Usually, when a bill is going through the normal process, what happens is that after the first reading, it's referred to a committee in Parliament, and they would usually call for submission of memoranda to bring, people's views and things about the bill, and then they would call those who have submitted memoranda to come and work with them as they review the bill. So after they indicated, after their first meeting, that they wanted this to be done, it was accepted by Parliament that this is how this bill is going to go. So they put in the usual adverts for stakeholders to submit memos, and they received quite a number of memos, including the Affirmative Action Bill Coalition. So this was in, around about December or so. So in February this year, they held their initial consultations on the bill. They held a meeting where they did a clause-by-clause consideration, looked at what input stakeholders had brought with regard to some parts of the bill, and then that guided them in writing their report. So we were also there with them in October for 2 days to go through the bill, made input. There were a few challenges with the bill which really needed to be addressed. To be looked at. Yes, to be looked at.
Okay. Speaking of challenges, let me ask you about a few sections in the bill that I read. So I think Section 5.1 talks about 40% representation of women in public offices like Parliament, for example.
Okay, the way the bill is structured, the first schedule has some indicators.
Okay.
So the indicators, it starts from 30% all the way to 50%. So it indicates that when the bill, I don't know which version you looked at, the version which was laid in October, there was a problem with it. The dates were a bit outdated.
Okay.
It was indicated that once the bill, was passed from 2020 to around about 2023, you would have to push for 30%.
Okay. So I saw the 30% reserved for women in positions, political party positions. So 30% of the positions in political parties should be reserved for women. So I have questions about that.
The way the bill is structured, what is it? That's what I said. Every part of the bill deals not only with Parliament.
Okay.
It deals with public sector. It deals with the private sector. Okay, it deals with the constitutional bodies, etc. So that the first schedule, which applies to all the sections, says that within the first 2 years, all the institutions should ensure that there's 30% at least representation of women.
So that's for public sector.
It says gender balance,
Okay.
So it talks about not for public sector alone. It's the bill. There are sections which applies to the private sector
Even
as
the
well.
private
So it says
sector.
that within the first 2 years, there should be an attempt should be made to get some kind of equity in ensuring that people of both genders are represented. Starts with 30%. Then the next few years, it says push for 40%. And then by the year 2030, there should be parity or
so
balance.
we begin with 30%. The question on my mind and on most people's minds, I believe, is how you're going to ensure this 30% representation. Now, I'll ask you this on the back of some other interviews I've had on the female factor with other female members of parliament who have said that, assuming the EC decides that, you know what, for certain regions, we are not going to allow any men to contest, or for all the men on the ballot papers, let's exclude them, okay, and vote for only women, or put only women on the ballot sheets. Even if we did that, we still will not have 20% female representation in parliament because we don't have enough women stepping forward to take up political roles. And one of the reasons that they put forward is the real challenges that women in positions of power, especially in politics, face in this country. From very trivial things like you are not married, or you don't have children, or you're somebody's girlfriend, or you don't respect, or you don't consult. Things that you would assume should not affect a person's leadership aspirations. So a lot of women are not even putting themselves up for political office or public offices. How are we going to, if this bill is passed, and okay, so we're allowing for 30% representation, how are we going to ensure that this actually happens, considering the struggles that women who want such offices have to grapple with?
Okay. So first of all, it's very important to bear in mind that when this law comes in, the law cannot work alone. There's a need for education. There's a need for sensitization. We are aware that we live in a patriarchal society.
Yes.
We live in a society where, for a long time, access to education, particularly higher education, was not so, didn't go so well for women. Many women preferred to have their male children going higher in education than women. So the amount of educated women is not the same as men, even though that it's changing with time. We also live in a society where religion also has an influence in terms of leadership, etc. And then the nature of the politics that we have in this country, a lot of education and sensitization has to go on. But with regard to the proposition that you made, the section of the law dealing with political parties, which is, I think, currently is a section 24, it needs a little more work on it. It doesn't necessarily say 30%. That's why I said it's also linked up with the same schedule. Yes, 30 to 40%. What we are saying is that if the law was in place, it would happen. Because a country like Sierra Leone had a similar issue like we do have
with
in Ghana. With representation, yes. They also, until 2022, also had 14.5%. If you use parliament as, let's say, the way to, yardstick to measure. They passed the law. Their political history is very similar to that of Ghana. They also have what they call the first past the post system. Usually, it's more difficult to implement affirmative action in parliament and the rest of places in the first past the post system than it is with countries that have proportional representation, like Rwanda, etc. So we like to look at Sierra Leone as a good example. They passed the law, starting with, they said 30%. For every position, public position, there should be 30% representation of women. And then they did an amendment to their electoral laws. Their laws were very similar to ours, but they did a little amendment to their law to ensure that provision was made for this, what they call the list of women. For everything, you need to have 30% women elected, appointed, etc., etc. And it worked. Women are out there. There are lots of qualified women, but the nature of our politics, in particular in Ghana, it is very, very rough, and it is very expensive. And because women are overburdened with childcare, etc. Very few women have the kind of money that it takes to, engage in active politics. So we believe that once the law is passed, once some consequential amendments are made to our political parties law, which will give the electoral commissioner the right to indicate maybe which areas, if we decide to have some special seats, for instance, in the final, the bill is in Parliament, so we don't know what the final law will look like by the time it goes through the whole process and becomes a law. If, for instance, it makes room for special seats where only women will compete against each other in certain areas or within every constituency, maybe if a decision is taken that some seats should be reserved for women, then structures will be put in place once the law is passed and we know the final text of the law. And I tell you, the women are out there.
The women
there
are
are
out
many
there.
women out there, but they are put off by the challenges, the insults. They are put off by the lack of money. So all the structures, if they are put in place, and in particular, if the law is there, they would appear.
If the law is there, the women will take up the roles.
They will take up the roles.
In your mind, how long do you foresee this bill continuing to stay in Parliament? When do you think we'll finally see it passed?
I'm hoping that they will pass it before the rise for this particular session.
So,
and it is possible.
Okay.
It's not a very big law. The sections are just about 30.
Is there the political will to pass it?
Well, we believe so. I mean, Cabinet approved it. It is in Parliament. In our lobbying, we've been talking to people from both sides. We've lobbied the Speaker, and we believe that there is goodwill.
There is goodwill.
For this particular bill to pass, because Ghana has fallen way behind when it comes to a lot of the gender rankings in many areas. For instance, even looking at Parliament by itself alone, there's gender rankings which are done by the Inter-Parliamentary Union. Ghana is not faring well at all. And when the law is in place and we have more women instead of the 14.5% that we have, it would help Ghana to improve on gender rankings, the worldwide gender rankings. It would also enable Ghana to be able to comply with its international obligations as well. It will also enable Ghana to comply with its own constitution. Our constitution, Article 17 of the Constitution talks about gender equality, etc. First of all, it indicates that there shouldn't be any discrimination on the basis of gender. But Article 17.4 clearly states that where historically it can be established that there's gender imbalance, there is nothing wrong if Parliament passes a law to put in programs and policies to right the wrong. Okay? So the affirmative action, the bill is called, the full name of the bill is Affirmative Action Gender Equality Bill, to become the law once it is passed into law. It is a law which is coming up with structures and some programs which will help the nation to work towards getting gender balance. And once we reach gender balance in a particular area, the program will stop. So there's a lot of monitoring.
It will become the norm.
Yes, to become the norm, and then the program will come.
Well, I look forward to talking to you again when the bill is finally passed, hopefully before this Parliament rises, yes, on the law as it is, if it is any different from the bill as has been currently presented. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you very much, too, for the opportunity.
It's been great.
Thank you.
If you had any questions about the Affirmative Action Bill, I hope some of them are answered. I know that this conversation requires about 2 hours. I know that. We will give you that extended version in good time. But this has been the Female Factor. I've been talking to the Mrs. Sheila Minkah Premo. She is an established lawyer, gender rights activist, and the convener of the Affirmative Action Bill Coalition. Soon, we're going to talk to Roland Walker, who's on the ground bringing you Community Manifesto. But if you're a lover of scents, well, let me introduce you to a versatile collection from French Avenue brands, okay? So if you love the freshness of citrus, the elegance of the florals, the warmth of the woods, exotic spices, smoky richness of tobacco, each perfume is designed to complement your unique style and your personality. You can find our signature scents and elevate every occasion with a new line of French Avenue perfume collections like Amber d'Or Enigma Vie. We've also got Rose de Privé Tobacco Dior, the Abrage Caesar, Paradox, Music de Privé, Imperial, Apex, Queen of the Monarch, Ace, The Promise, Intense Addiction, and many, many more at La Perfumerie. Feel good in your signature scents. For bulk purchase, you can call La Perfumerie at 0544 910 447, or you can find them in Okaishi, on the ground floor of the Dromo Plaza building, adjacent to the Stanbic Bank at the Georgina stores. Just on that Georgina stores lane, you can find them there.